We will start the new chapter, that is facial paralysis. It is correlated to ardhita. The condition facial paralysis, it literally means the loss of facial movement due to nerve damage. So basically there is a damage in the nerve, which leads to lack of function of that nerve, leading to loss of facial movements. The symptoms usually seen are, as you can see in the diagram, it's the absence of forehead wrinkling, droopy eyelid, dry eye or excessive tearing, facial paralysis or weakness, totally the muscles of the face, then drooping corner of the mouth, dry mouth, impaired taste, and many more symptoms which we will deal in detail later. So there is a totally loss of sensory as well as motor functions. The nerve which is involved here is obviously the seventh nerve, that is the facial nerve, seventh cranial nerve. It arises from the second branchial arch. So in the time of evolution or embryology, embryo, from the embryo level, the second branchial arch. The branchial arches are those tissues which are found, band of tissues which are found under the brain, from which various parts of head and neck are developed later. So there are almost 6 branchial arches, and facial nerve and the muscles which are responsible for the facial expressions, all these arises from the second branchial arch. And the lesion of the facial paralysis is commonly unilateral, that is one side of the face is affected, that is usually one side of the face. That's why it's correlated to ardhita, karthe. And the lesions can occur at the level of nucleus or above the nucleus and below the nucleus. That is, at the level of nucleus means the nucleus of this facial nerve is situated in the lower pons. The destruction can occur at that exact point of the nucleus, or it can be central or the cerebral. The central connections, or from the cerebral cortex to the nucleus, the pathway from the cerebral cortex to the nucleus, or it's called a supranucleus, also called a supranuclear. So any lesions can affect from in this pathway, and after the nucleus it is the peripheral lesions. That means the nerve is formed, and any lesions that affects the nerve proper, that is the peripheral lesions, form a lesions which causes facial paralysis. So we need to know some basic anatomy of the facial nerve, its course, its origin and course, and later learn the applied aspect, that's regarding the symptoms of the condition. So here you can see the nucleus of the facial nerve, which is situated in the lower part of the pons. You can see a number of nucleus there, and among that is the facial nucleus, that is the motor nucleus, and the other two, that is the nucleus of solitary tract and the superior salivatory nucleus. Superior salivatory nucleus, that is the parasympathetic nucleus, and the nucleus of solitary tract, that is the sensory nucleus. So all these combine together to form the facial nerve. And the abducens nucleus is shown to show the pathway of the nerve from the motor route, that is from the facial nucleus. You can see the nerve runs backwards and rounds the abducens nucleus and then comes forward. So that is why abducens nucleus is shown in the picture. Now we will see the course of the nerve in detail. Now we will deal with the nucleus of the central connections. Firstly, the central connections of the facial nerve. So from where it origins in the cerebral cortex. So that's the upper motor neuron part of the facial nerve, which is located in the primary motor cortex of the frontal lobe. You all know about, I think you have completed your anatomy, so you will be well aware of the primary motor cortex of the frontal lobe, which is situated along the precentral gyrus part of the frontal lobe of the brain. And you can see this picture, this diagram of the homunculus or the miniature man. So here the motor connections, all the motor connections have been shown, that the motor control in the primary motor cortex is being shown to the respective body parts. So specific areas have been defined in the brain for the functioning of specific parts of body. So that is the homunculus. So you can see in the face, where the face is situated, the which part of the motor cortex, the control of the facial muscles is situated. So you can make out from this figure. So the upper motor neuron is starting from that point in the primary motor cortex of the frontal lobe. So it descends ipsilaterally, means firstly it descends along the same side and later it crosses to the opposite side. Okay, it descends ipsilaterally as the cortico-bulbar tract via the genu of internal capsule. So from so here, since it is a cranial nerve and the nucleus is located in the pons, so the upper central connection from the cerebral cortex to the pons is called as a cortico-bulbar tract. Okay, so it's a cortico-bulbar tract that arises from the frontal lobe, primary motor cortex of the frontal lobe, and it runs down via the genu of the internal capsule. Internal capsules you will be knowing. So it's the connection from the cortex, that is the white matter connection. It consists of the axons which ascends and descends to the cerebrum, and more specific, through the genu of the internal capsule it runs down and it reaches the facial nucleus in the pontine tegmental part or the basal part of the pons, where the facial nucleus proper is situated. So this is the upper motor neuron connection of the facial nerve from the primary motor cortex to the pontine tegmentum, where the facial nucleus is located. So any injury in these parts, in the facial nerve nucleus to the upper motor neuron to the primary motor cortex point pathway, any lesion in this pathway via the genu of the internal capsule, all this comes in this pathway, it causes central facial palsy. Okay, so in the lower pons of the brainstem are, so now we will see the nucleuses which are situated in the pons, which are related to the origin of the facial nerve. As I told, this is a combination of various motor, sensory and parasympathetic nucleuses. So now we will see each one in detail. That is the first is the principal nucleus. Principal nucleus means that is the main motor nucleus of the facial nerve, the motor innervation of the facial muscles that are responsible for the facial expression, and also the nerve to the stapedius. Stapedius means the small muscles in the ear. Nerve to stapedius. Stapedius is the bone, smallest bone, which is responsible for the vibration and conduction of the sound. Nerve to stapedius is a nerve that supplies that muscle. So these are the motor innervation from the principal nucleus, and then the parasympathetic innervation, that is the superior salivatory nucleus, that gives the branches to the sublingual and the submandibulary gland, that is for salivation, and also a branch to the lacrimal gland, that for producing the tears. So there is again a sensory innervation, that is the nucleus tractus solitarius, the anterior two-third of the tongue, the taste sensation via the geniculate ganglion, it is transferred to the nucleus tractus solitarius. Okay, so these are the main connections of the main nuclear connections of the facial nerve. Also, another branch is associated with this group, that is the sensory branch, that is temperature, touch and pain, from the posterior part of external ear. the external auditory meters. So from all these external ear or the external auditory meters, the pain, temperature, touch and pain is also conveyed along with the facial nerve through a sensory branch, but it is going to the spinal trigeminal nucleus that is situated just behind the nucleus tractus solitarius. So all these nucleus, from all these nucleus mentioned here, the motor, sensory and parasympathetic nerves arise and join together to form the facial nerve. So now we will see this anatomical courses. The course of the facial nerve, after its origin, it is a complex course. It is a zigzag course through the cranial cavities. It has many branches at different levels of its course and transmits a combination of sensory, motor and parasympathetic fibers at different levels, as I have mentioned earlier. So anatomically, it can be divided into two parts. That's the intracranial part and the extracranial part. Intracranial part, that means the course of the nerve through the cranial cavity and the cranium itself, and the extracranial, and once the course of the nerve that emerges from the intracranial part, that's outside the cranium, and that means the face and neck. The nerve is running through the face and neck. That is the extracranial part. We'll just see the intracranial part after it arises in the pons. It begins as two roots. That's a long motor root and a small sensory root. So it's called as the nerve to intermedius or the intermediate nerve. The sensory root is called as intermediate nerve. It consists of sensory as well as parasympathetic fibers. And the motor root, it is single. It's a long motor root and a small sensory root. And the two roots, it just travel through the internal acoustic meters, a 1 centimeter long opening in the petrous part of the temporal bone. You might be familiar with all these. I'm not going into detail of these bony parts. Here, they are with very close proximity to the inner ear. They pass through the nearby to the inner ear. And still within the temporal bone, the roots leave the internal acoustic meters and enter the facial canal. This facial canal is an Z-shaped structure. So within the facial canal, three important events occur. That is, firstly, the two roots, that is the sensory and motor, it fuse to form the facial nerve. And as it runs forward, it forms the geniculate ganglion. Ganglion is a collection of nerve cell bodies outside the central nervous system. So here we can see the nerves. The nerve has already left the central part. It's running through the facial canal, and here a ganglion is formed where there are find the cell bodies outside the group of cell bodies outside the central nervous system. So this ganglion is important in case of sensory fibers, because it's a sensory fibers are always associated with the ganglion, the cell bodies. So first is the two root fuse to form the facial nerve, and second is it forms the geniculate ganglion, and after that it gives rise to a few branches. That is the greater petrosal nerve that is going to the lacrimal glands. It's a parasympathetic fibers. It goes to the lacrimal gland at this point, and it runs forwards to form the nerve to stapedius again. It's a small connection to the nerve to stapedius. It's motor fibers to the stapedius muscle. And the chorda tympani, that's a special sensory fibers to the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. And after these events, it exits the facial canal and the cranium. That much is the intracranial part, and it exits via the stylomastoid foramen, located just posterior to the styloid process of the temporal bone. Once again, you need to refresh your anatomy and remember all these bony landmarks. It exits the intracranial part through the stylomastoid foramen. So all these parts are important in the sense that injury in any of these parts can lead to facial paralysis. So all these anatomical landmarks are to be remembered. And now the extracranial part. So as the facial nerve exits the stylomastoid foramen, it gives rise to the certain fibers to the pinna of the ear and the external auditory meters. This is sensory. They're related to temperature, touch, and pain. It travels back through the ganglion, geniculate ganglion, and to the nucleus. Then also fibers to the posterior belly of digastric, stylohyoid, and superior and inferior auricular and occipitalis muscles. So all these muscles are related to the movement of the tongue and the face. So the motor functions of these are dependent on these fibers. And the nerve continues anteriorly and inferiorly into the parotid gland. But it is not giving any contribution towards the innervation of parotid gland. It just passed by the parotid gland, and after the parotid gland, or within the parotid gland, the nerve terminates by splitting into 5 branches. That is a temporal branch, zygomatic branch, buccal branch, mandibular branch, and the cervical branch. The temporal branch, it innervates the frontalis muscle in your foreheads, then wrinkling of your forehead. So orbicularis oculi, that is closing of your eyelid, and corrugator supercilii, that is responsible for your movement of your eyebrows. And zygomatic branch, it innervates again the orbicularis oculi muscle. And the buccal branch, orbicularis oris, around the lips or the movement of the mouth. Buccinator for blowing your cheek and chewing. Zygomatic muscle is responsible for your smile. Marginal mandibular branch that innervates the mentalis muscle, related to your jaw, and the the lower lip. The cervical branch, it innervates the platysma. It's a superficial muscle in your neck overlapping the sternocleidomastoid muscle. It relates with the movement of your lower jaw. So all these nerves are the terminal branches of the facial nerve, and any lesion in the facial nerve and the route or pathway of the facial nerve can lead to paralysis and loss of function of all these actions related to all these muscles. So here is a short representation or simple representation of the course of the nerve, that is, it's having a sensory node and a motor node root. The sensory root consists of sensory nerves as well as parasympathetic nerves, and the motor root is the principal root, mainly for the motor functions only. And it joins together and it reaches the geniculate ganglion. You can see a small elevation, that is the geniculate ganglion. That's where the great petrosal nerve arises, petrosal nerve for the lacrimation. It goes to the eyes, and then it runs downwards again to the nerve to stapedius. You can see the motor nerve to the stapedius. That is a small bone in the inner ear, responsible for hearing. And again it continues to give the chorda tympani, which runs to the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. Those sensory sensation is conveyed through that, and it leaves through the small circle. You can see that the stylomastoid foramen that becomes extracranial, and there it leaves the first branch, that is the posterior auricular nerve, that goes to the ear. Again sensory, it is related to the pain, temperature, and touch of the external ear. And again motor functions to the digastric and the stylohyoid related to the tongue, and then it gives of the 5 terminal motor branches. In the first diagram, the terminal branches of facial nerve is being shown, and the muscles also, the face which supply. and just try to compare it with the second diagram, in which the symptoms of facial nerve paralysis are being shown, and just check the symptoms with the corresponding muscles and the nerve supply to assess the condition.